The transport shuttle touched down on the Krathex proving grounds with a soft hiss. Jake Morrison stepped out into a space station that made him feel like an ant walking into a cathedral. Everything here was built for giants. The corridors stretched 20 ft high. The doorways were wide enough to fit 3 humans standing shoulder to shoulder. Even the air felt heavy, like the station itself was pressing down on him. Jake carried single equipment bag over his shoulder. Inside was everything he owned for the hunt: a standard plasma rifle, a combat knife his father gave him, survival gear, water purification tablets, and his grandfather's old compass. The compass didn't work in space, but Jake brought it anyway. It reminded him where he came from. The main gathering hall was already full when Jake entered. He stopped in the doorway and stared. Hundreds of hunters filled the space, and every single one of them was bigger than him. The Krathex warriors stood 9 ft tall, with bodies that looked carved from black stone. Their skin was covered in natural armor plates that clicked when they moved. They moved like liquid metal, their 6 arms flowing in patterns that hurt to watch. The Thornback hunters had spikes growing from their shoulders and backs, natural weapons that could pierce steel. Jake was 5'10". He weighed 180 pounds. Next to these creatures, he looked like a child who wandered into the wrong room. He walked to the registration desk, trying to ignore the eyes that followed him. The registration officer was a Krathex named Dresh. He looked down at Jake from his great height, and his mouth split into what might have been a smile. It showed too many teeth. Name and world, Dresh said. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. Jake Morrison, Earth. Dresh typed something into his computer. Then he laughed. It was a deep, booming sound that made other hunters turn to look. Earth, Dresh said loudly. The Softworlders. I heard stories about your kind. No claws, no armor, no venom, just soft skin and weak bones. He leaned down close. Tell me, human, did your people send you here as a joke? Jake met his eyes and said nothing. He learned a long time ago that silence was often the best answer. D laughed again and processed his registration. You are hunter number 47. The oddsmakers give you a 3% chance of surviving the first day. I think that is generous. Jake took his registration chip and walked away. Behind him he heard Dresh telling the story to other hunters. More laughter followed. The betting hall was next to the equipment check. Jake passed by and saw his name already on the boards. The odds next to it were the worst of any hunter. Someone had written "Dead by sunset" next to his picture. Others were making jokes in languages Jake didn't understand, but laughter sounded the same in every language. Massive shape blocked his path. Jake looked up at a Krathex warrior who made Dresh look small. This one wore armor decorated with trophies from a 100 hunt. Teeth and claws and fragments of bone hung from chains across his chest. I am Gormalik, the warrior said. I have hunted on 70 worlds. I have killed beasts that would make your armies run in fear. He looked down at Jake like examining an insect. You are the human everyone speaks about, the one who thinks he can hunt with warriors. I'm just here to do my best, Jake said. Gormalik laughed. Your best? Look at you. Where are your claws? Where are your fangs? You cannot even reach my throat without jumping. What will you do when the real predators come? Will you ask them nicely to lower themselves so you can fight other Hunters gathered around, forming a circle. They wanted to see what the human would do. "I'll figure it out," Jake said calmly. "Figure it out," Gormalik repeated. He said something in his own language, and the other Kratheks laughed. "We have a saying on my world: the small creature that enters the hunting ground becomes food for the worthy." He tapped one of his claws against Jake's chest. "I wonder what you will taste like." A new voice cut through the crowd. "Enough." Everyone turned. Orothy Huntress walked forward. Her name was Zur, and her reputation reached across 3 sectors. She had 6 arms, each one carrying a different weapon. Her movements were so fast they left after images in the air. "Gormalik, you waste time bullying the weak," Sierra said. She looked at Jake with her 4 eyes. "Though I wonder the same question, human, does your world even have real predators, or do you hunt the small creatures that run from shadows?" "Earth has predators," Jake said quietly. "We have creatures that kill for food. We have creatures that kill for territory. And we have the most dangerous predator of all." "Oh, and what is that?" Zur asked. "Other humans." For a moment there was silence, then Zur laughed. It was a sharp musical sound. "At least you have some spirit, but spirit does not stop claws. Spirit does not stop teeth. You will learn this when the hunt begins." She turned away. "If you survive long enough to learn anything." The crowd began to break up. The entertainment was over. Jake continued to the equipment check and verified his gear. Everything was standard issue, nothing special, nothing that would give him an edge against hunters who were born with weapons built into their bodies. As the sun set on the station, Jake stood at the observation window and looked out at the stars. Tomorrow they would all be transported to Vidian 7. Tomorrow the hunt would begin. 50 hunters would enter the jungle. Only the best would survive to claim honor. Jake knew what everyone thought. He was too small, too weak, too human. The betting pools gave him almost no chance. The other hunters saw him as prey, not competition. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was crazy to be here. But Jake remembered something his grandfather told him once. His grandfather had been a soldier in Earth's last war. He was a small man, too, in a world that valued size and strength, but he survived when bigger men fell. He survived because he understood something important. The biggest predator is not always the strongest. Sometimes the biggest predator is the one who thinks differently. Jake touched the compass in his pocket. Tomorrow would tell if thinking differently was enough. High above the gathering hall, in a private observation room, the Supreme Hunter watched. Karthaga had seen 1,000 hunts. He had witnessed warriors of every species prove their worth or die trying. He rarely watched the registration anymore. It was always the same boasting and posturing, but something made him pause when the human entered. Something about the way the small creature moved. No fear, no anger. Just quiet observation. Karthaga made a note in his personal log. The human worth watching. Then he returned to preparing for the hunt. Tomorrow would be interesting. The drop pods fell like meteors through Vidian 7's atmosphere. Inside his pod, Jake gripped the safety harness and tried not to think about the fact that he was falling toward a jungle planet designed to kill hunters. The pod shook and rattled. Warning lights flashed. Then with a bone-jarring crash, it slammed into the ground. Jake released the harness and kicked open the door. Humid air hit him. Like a wet blanket, the jungle was alive, with sounds he had never heard before. Screeches and roars and clicking noises that came from everywhere and nowhere. The trees stretched hundreds of feet into the air, their trunks as wide as houses. Strange plants grew between them, some with flowers that moved like they were breathing. The pod's computer spoke in a flat voice. "You have landed in Sector 7. Zone Red. 50 hunters are now active. Current eliminations 0. Good luck." Participant 47, Jake, pulled out his equipment and did a quick check. Everything survived the landing. He activated his tracking device so the orbital monitors could follow his progress. Then he looked around and started to think most hunters would charge into the jungle looking for the biggest prey. That was the traditional way. Kill something impressive, collect the trophy, and prove your strength. But Jake was not most hunters. He was smaller, weaker, and had no natural weapons. If he hunted like the others, he would die like the others, so he did something different. Jake found a tall tree and climbed it carefully. It took him 20 minutes to reach a branch that gave him a good view of the surrounding area. From up here he could see the jungle spread out in every direction. He could see water sources. He could see animal trails. He could see the areas where the plants grew differently, which meant something about that ground was different too. He took out a small notebook and started drawing a map. While Jake was mapping the jungle, the other hunters were already making their first kills. The orbital monitors broadcast the highlights to viewers across the galaxy. Gormalik found a crystal bear, a massive creature with claws that could cut through stone. The Krathex warrior fought it hand to hand and broke its neck with his bare hands. The crowd watching from the space station cheered. Zur discovered a sky serpent, a flying predator with venom that could melt flesh. She used all 6 of her arms to climb onto its back mid-flight and drove her blades into its brain. The serpent crashed into the jungle floor. Sierra stood on its corpse and roared her victory. More cheers echoed through the viewing halls. A thornback hunter named Vrax killed a pack of razor spine lizards that ambushed him. He used his natural spikes to impale 3 of them, while his weapons took down the rest. 5 kills in 5 minutes, and Jake Morrison, the orbital monitors showed him sitting in a tree writing in a notebook. The commentators had a great time with that. The human appears to be documenting his final hours. One of them said perhaps he is writing a letter home to explain why he thought this was a good idea. The betting halls updated their odds. Jake's chances of survival dropped to 1%, but Jake was not writing letters. He was learning. He watched how the animals moved. He saw which creatures hunted during the day and which ones waited for night. He noticed that certain animals avoided certain areas, which meant those areas probably had bigger predators. He found water sources and noted which ones had fresh tracks around them. On the second day, the first death was announced. A hunter from a species called the Gormoth stepped into a plant that released paralytic spores. He could not move when the jungle scavengers found him. The orbital monitors stopped broadcasting his death out of respect. But everyone knew what happened. Jake heard the announcement while he was building a small shelter. He paused for a moment, said a quiet prayer for the dead hunter, and then continued working. His shelter was not impressive, but it kept him dry and hidden. That was all it needed to do. By the third day, 12 hunters had either withdrawn or died. The jungle was proving more dangerous than expected. A Velry hunter lost 3 of her arms to an ambush predator. She withdrew in shame. 2 Kratheks warriors got into a territorial fight with each other, and both had to be evacuated. A Thornback hunter fell into a pit trap left by a previous hunt and broke his spine, and Jake Morrison still had not registered a single kill. The mockery intensified. In the betting halls, people were making jokes about the human who came to Vidian 7 to watch animals instead of hunt them. Some hunters made it their personal mission to find Jake and humiliate him before he gave up and withdrew, but finding Jake was harder than expected. He moved through the jungle like smoke. He did not leave obvious trails. He did not make camps in visible locations. He seemed to understand something about moving through dangerous territory that the other hunters, with all their strength and natural weapons, did not consider important. Jake spent his time learning the jungle's rhythm. He discovered that the large predators hunted during the morning and evening. The middle of the day was safer for movement. He found that certain plants would shake their leaves when big animals approached, giving him early warning. He learned to recognize the calls of scout birds that flew ahead of predator packs. On the 4th day, Jake finally made his first kill, not because he was hunting for glory, but because he was hungry. He caught a rabbit-like creature using a simple trap made from vines. He cooked it carefully, making sure the smoke from his fire dispersed through the tree canopy so it would not give away his location. The orbital monitors recorded it as his first official kill. The commentators barely mentioned it. The human has finally managed to catch his dinner, one said dismissively. How impressive. Number 4. What the commentators did not mention was that Jake was moving deeper into the jungle. He was heading toward an area marked on the station's map as the Deep Vale. It was a region where the trees grew so thick that even the orbital monitors had trouble tracking movement. Most hunters avoided it because visibility was terrible and the danger level was unknown. Jake was going there on purpose. He had noticed something in his observations. The large predators near the edge of the Deep Vale behaved strangely. They were territorial and aggressive, but they all seemed to avoid going too deep into that area. That meant something in there scared them, something bigger, something more dangerous, and Jake wanted to know what it was. On the 5th morning, Jake crossed into the Deep Vale. The jungle became darker. The sounds changed. Everything here felt older, wilder, primal. He moved slowly, checking every step, watching every shadow. The orbital monitors lost clear tracking of his position. The commentators assumed he got lost and would either find his way out or become another casualty. But Jake was not lost. He was following signs that none of the other hunters would have recognized. Claw marks on trees that were too high for any creature he had seen, tracks in the mud that were enormous but oddly shaped, and something else, a smell sharp and strange like ozone mixed with rotting meat. Jake found a place to hide and waited, patient. That was when he first saw the shadow render. It moved through the Deep Vale like it was part of the darkness itself. 40 ft long from head to tail, skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, claws that could rip through steel, and the most terrifying thing, about it was how silently it moved. Something that large should not be able to move without sound, but it did. Jake watched it from his hiding spot, barely breathing. This was an apex predator. This was the thing that made all the other dangerous creatures avoid this territory. This was the kind of beast that appeared in nightmares, and Jake realized something that made his blood run cold. This creature was not supposed to be here. Shadow renders were thought to be extinct, but here one was very much alive, hunting in the deep vale. The creature passed within 20 ft of Jake's hiding spot. It paused. Its head turned slowly, scanning the area. Jake froze completely. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, but he knew running would mean death. After an eternity, the shadow render continued moving. It disappeared into the darkness like it had never been there. Jake waited another hour before he moved. Then he started tracking it, because if he understood it, he might survive it. Jake spent 2 days tracking the shadow render. He learned its patterns the way a scientist studies a rare specimen. The creature hunted twice a day, once at dawn and once at dusk. It had a territory that covered roughly 10 square miles of the deep vale, and it always returned to the same general area, deep in the darkest part of the jungle. Jake moved carefully through the dense vale, following signs that others would have missed: broken branches at a certain height, scratches on rocks, the absence of smaller predators in specific zones. He was building a picture of the creature's behavior piece by piece. On the 6th day of the hunt, Jake finally understood what the shadow render was protecting. He found the nesting ground. It was a cave hidden behind a waterfall, surrounded by dense vegetation. Jake approached slowly, every sense alert. Inside the cave he could hear soft sounds, not the rumbling of an adult shadow render, but something else. Something smaller. The creature had young. That changed everything. A territorial predator was dangerous. Territorial predator protecting offspring was 10 times more deadly. Jake marked the location in his memory and started to back away slowly. He needed to stay far away from this area, but while Jake was making his discoveries in the deep vale, the hunt was reaching a critical point. 38 hunters remained. Tensions were high. Some hunters had impressive trophy collections. Others had nothing to show for 6 days in the jungle, and everyone was getting desperate to prove themselves. Gormalik led a group of 5 hunters toward the deep vale. He had heard rumors about something big hiding in that region, something that would make a legendary trophy. His pride demanded that he be the one to claim it. Zur was with him, along with 3 other experienced hunters. They moved through the jungle with confidence, making no attempt at stealth. They were apex predators themselves. What did they have to fear? The shadow render detected them long before they detected it. The attack came at midday, when the hunting party was moving through a clearing near the deep vale's edge. One moment they were walking, the next moment the world exploded into chaos. The shadow render appeared from nowhere. Its ability to bend light made it nearly invisible, until it was already among them. One of the hunters, a thornback named Cash, died before he could even scream. The creature's claws went through his armor like it was paper. Gormalik roared a battle cry and charged. His plasma cannon fired repeatedly, hitting the shadow render's hide, but barely leaving marks. The creature was armored by nature. ways their technology could not match. Sir moved with incredible speed, her 6 arms working in coordination. She landed 3 solid strikes on the creatures. Side, they drew blood, but they also drew attention, the shadow renderers. Tail whipped around and caught her mid dodge. She flew 30 ft and crashed into a tree. 2 of her arms broke from the impact. The other hunters tried to fight, but they were not prepared for something like this. Another hunter died when the shadow renderer's jaws closed around him. The crunch of breaking armor echoed through the jungle. Retreat. Gormalik shouted, "Fall back now." Survivors ran. The shadow render pursued them for half a mile, killing one more hunter before it suddenly stopped. It roared once, a sound that shook the trees, and then turned back toward the deep vale. It had driven the invaders from its territory. That was enough. The orbital monitors captured everything. The Supreme Hunter, Karga, watched from his observation room with great interest. A shadow render alive on Vidian 7. This changed the nature of the entire hunt. He checked the tracking data and noticed something interesting. The human had been in the deep vale for 3 days. The human had been near the shadow render's territory, yet the human was still alive. How? Karga pulled up Jake's movement data and studied it carefully. The human was not running randomly through the deep vale. He was moving in patterns, careful patterns, like he was studying something interesting. The Supreme Hunter said quietly. Down in the jungle, the surviving hunters regrouped. Gormalik was injured but alive. Shira was in bad shape, 2 arms broken and ribs cracked. The other survivors were traumatized. They had faced death before, but nothing like this. "We need to leave this area," one hunter said. "That creature is beyond our ability to hunt." "No," Gormalik said through gritted teeth. "We are warriors. We do not flee." "We just did flee," another hunter pointed out, "and 3 of us died in less than a minute." The argument continued, but it became meaningless when they heard the sound, a roar in the distance. The shadow render was moving again, and it was coming their way. "It is hunting us," Zur said quietly. "We invaded its territory. Now it wants to eliminate the threat." The hunters scattered. This time there was no coordination, no battle plan, just the primal instinct to survive. They ran in different directions, hoping to confuse the predator. Gormalik ran toward what he thought was safety, crashing through the jungle in a panic. His warrior pride was forgotten. His trophy collection meant nothing. He just wanted to live. He did not realize he was running deeper into the deep vale. He did not realize he was heading directly toward the nesting ground. Jake heard Gormalik coming long before he saw him. The Krathek's warrior was not being subtle. He sounded like a landslide moving through the forest. Jake, hidden in his observation post, watched the big warrior stumble into the clearing near the waterfall, and Jake realized what was about to happen. Gormalik was standing 20 ft from the nesting cave. The shadow render would be here any second, and when it found an intruder this close to its young, it would not just drive him away, it would kill him. Jake had a choice to make. He could stay hidden, let nature take its course. Gormalik had mocked him, had called him weak, had said he would be food for worthy creatures. There was a certain justice in letting the Krathek's warrior face the consequences of his own pride, but Jake thought about his grandfather. Thought about what the old man taught him. Being strong is not about letting others die when you could help. Being strong is doing the right thing even when it is hard. Jake made his decision. In 2 seconds, he stood up from his hiding place and shouted, "Gormalik, run!" Now, the Krothex warrior turned. Confused, he saw the small human standing on a branch pointing frantically behind him. And then he heard it, the deep rumbling growl that meant death was coming. The shadow render emerged from the jungle, its eyes fixed on the intruder near its nest. It was not going to chase Gormalik away this time. It was going to end him. Jake did not think about what he was doing. He just acted. He raised his plasma rifle and fired directly at the shadow render's eyes. The shots did not penetrate its armor, but they got its attention. The massive head turned toward Jake, the creature's eyes, ancient and intelligent, focused on this new threat, this tiny creature that dared to challenge it. Jake jumped from the tree and hit the ground running. He heard the shadow render behind him crashing through the jungle. He heard Gormalik screaming his name, but Jake did not stop. He ran with every bit of speed his human legs could manage. The chase had begun. Jake ran toward the area he had scouted 2 days ago. Canyon system with narrow passages and unstable ground, a place where his smaller size might be an advantage, where his knowledge of the terrain might be the only thing keeping him alive. Shadow render followed. It was faster. It was stronger. It was evolution's perfect killing machine. But Jake Morrison was human, and humans had been running from bigger predators since the dawn of time, running, learning, adapting, and surviving. The canyon was half a mile away. Jake counted his steps, counted his breaths, calculated how much time he had before those massive jaws closed around him. Not enough time, not nearly enough, but he ran anyway because that is what humans do. They face impossible odds and they run toward survival with everything they have. The shadow render roared behind him, close enough that Jake could feel the vibration in his bones. The canyon was 300 YD away, then 200, then 100. Jake could hear the creature's breathing. Now could smell its breath, hot in rank and deadly. 50 yards to the canyon. 25 yards. The shadow renderer's shadow fell over Jake as it prepared to strike. Jake dove forward, rolling across the ground and coming up in a sprint. He hit the canyon entrance at full speed and kept running. The real chase was just beginning. The canyon was exactly as Jake remembered it from his scouting trip 2 days earlier. Narrow passages between stone walls, loose rocks that could cause slides, ancient tree roots that crossed the path. Like trip wires, he had memorized every detail because some part of him knew he might need to use this place to survive. Now that knowledge was the only thing keeping him alive. Jake ran through the canyon entrance and immediately cut left, ducking under a low-hanging rock formation. The shadow render crashed through behind him, too large to fit easily through the gap. It had to smash through the rock, which bought Jake 3 precious seconds. 3 seconds to run deeper into the canyon, 3 seconds to put distance between himself and death. The canyon twisted and turned like a snake. Jake took the turns at full speed, his smaller size letting him navigate passages that forced the shadow render to slow down. But every time he gained a little distance, the creature caught up. It was stronger, faster, and it did not tire the way humans tired. Jake's lungs Burned, his legs screamed for rest. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with dirt and blood from scratches he did not remember getting, but he could not stop. Stopping meant dying. He reached the first trap point, a section of the canyon where the walls narrowed and the ground became unstable. Jake had noticed during his scout that the rocks here were held in place by only a few key stones. Remove those stones and the whole section would collapse. Jake pulled out his last explosive charge, the one he saved for emergencies. This qualified as an emergency. He placed the charge on the key support rock, set the timer for 5 seconds and ran. The shadow render rounded the corner just as the explosive detonated. The canyon wall collapsed in a thundering avalanche of rock and dust. Boulders the size of vehicles crashed down, blocking the passage. Jake kept running, gasping for air. He had bought himself maybe a minute, maybe less. The creature would find a way through or around the rock slide. It was too committed to the hunt to stop now, and Jake was right. 30 seconds later, he heard the sound of rocks being smashed aside. The shadow render was coming through the obstacle like it was made of sand. Nothing was going to stop it. Jake's radio crackled. The orbital monitors were trying to contact him. Participant 47, your vitals are critical. Do you wish to withdraw from the hunt? Jake did not waste breath answering. He focused on running on, remembering the map in his head, on staying alive for 1 more minute. Canyon opened into a wider area. This was the place Jake had been heading toward, a natural arena where the walls rose high on all sides. At the far end was a sheer cliff face. No way forward, no way to escape. Jake had run into dead end. The shadow render emerged from the canyon passage behind him. It moved slowly now, confidently. Its prey was trapped. There was no hurry. It could take its time with the kill. Jake turned to face the creature. His rifle was almost out of charge. His explosives were gone. His knife would be useless against armor that thick. He had no advantages left except one thing: his brain. The shadow render approached, its massive body blocking any escape route. Jake noticed something he had seen before during his observations. The way the creature moved, the way it positioned itself. It was not just hunting, it was evaluating, testing. This creature was intelligent. Jake lowered his rifle slowly. He made no sudden movements. He kept his eyes on the shadow render but did not stare directly into its eyes. That would be challenge, and he could not win a challenge against this creature. Instead, Jake started backing away slowly toward the cliff face, not running, not fleeing in panic, just backing away with careful, measured steps. The shadow render paused. This was not normal prey behavior. Prey ran or fought. This small creature was doing neither. Jake continued backing up until his back touched the cliff wall. There was nowhere left to go. The shadow render was 30 ft away, then 20, then 10. Jake could see every detail of the creature now, the scars from old battles, the intelligence in its eyes, the power in every muscle. This was not just a predator. This was the top of the food chain, the perfect hunter. And Jake realized what he had to do. He thought about Earth, about animals there that humans had learned to understand. Wolves that communicated through body language. Great apes that recognized submission and respect. Even sharks that could be calmed by understanding their behavior. Every predator had a language. Jake just had to speak it. He slowly lowered himself to one knee, a sign of submission in almost every species that had ever existed. He kept his head slightly bowed but his eyes open, showing respect but not fear. The shadow render stopped 10 ft away, its massive head tilted slightly, studying this strange prey. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out his grandfather's compass. The metal caught the light, creating a small flash. He moved the compass slowly, deliberately, making the light dance across the canyon wall. Shadow Render's eyes followed the light. Jake remembered something from his observations. The creature could bend light, could use it to become invisible. That meant it understood light in ways other creatures did not. It had a relationship with light. Jake moved the compass again, creating patterns with the reflected sunlight. Simple patterns at first, then more complex ones. He was trying to communicate in the only language he thought the creature might recognize. He flashed the light 3 times, then paused, then 3 times again. Pattern, a rhythm, not random, not threatening, just communication. The shadow render watched its breathing, slowed. The killing intent in its posture began to fade, replaced by something else. Curiosity. Jake continued the pattern. 3 flashes. Pause. 3 flashes. Pause. He was saying the same thing over and over in light language. I mean no harm. I respect your territory. Let me leave in peace. The creature stepped closer. Jake's heart hammered in his chest, but he held his ground. If he ran now, the hunting instinct would take over. He had to trust that this creature was intelligent enough to understand what he was trying to say. The shadow render's massive head came down until it was level with Jake. They were eye to eye. Now the creature could kill him with a single bite, one movement, and Jake Morrison would cease to exist. But Jake did not look away. He met the creature's gaze with respect, not fear. He kept the compass steady, the light patterns continuing. 3 flashes. Pause. 3 flashes. Pause. The shadow render exhaled, a sound like wind through cave. Then it did something Jake did not expect. It created its own light pattern. Its skin, which could absorb and bend light, now reflected it back. 3 pulses of bioluminescence along its body. Pause. 3 pulses again. It was answering him. Jake felt tears forming in his eyes, not from fear but from wonder. This creature, this perfect predator, was intelligent enough to communicate, to understand, to choose mercy over the kill. Slowly Jake stood up. He bowed his head once more, a final sign of respect. Then he started to walk along the canyon wall, giving the shadow render a wide berth, moving away from its territory, showing through his actions that he understood the boundaries and would respect them. The shadow render watched him go. It did not attack, did not pursue. It simply watched as the small human walked past it and back toward the canyon entrance. Jake walked for 50 yards before he dared to look back. The shadow render was still there, standing in the arena, watching him, making sure he truly left. Jake raised his hand once in farewell. Then he turned and walked away. Behind him, the shadow render roared, not a hunting roar, not a killing roar, but something else, an acknowledgement, a recognition between 2 hunters who understood each other. Jake made it back through the canyon and emerged into the jungle. His radio crackled again. Multiple voices this time. Did anyone see what just happened? The human faced the shadow render. Alone he survived. How did he survive? Jake did not answer. He checked his tracking device and saw. He was now 3 mi from the nesting ground. Far enough from the shadow renders territory. Then he remembered why he had faced the creature in the first place. Gormalik. Jake started running again. This time back toward where he had left the Krathex warrior. He found Gormalik sitting against a tree, his armor cracked, his breathing shallow. The big warrior had injuries from the earlier attack that were worse than they looked. You came back, Gormalik said quietly. Why? Because leaving you to die would be wrong, Jake said simply. He pulled out his emergency medical kit and started treating the warrior's wounds. Gormalik watched the small human work, his eyes showing an emotion that was rare for his species. Shame. I mocked you, Gormalik said. I called you weak. I said you would be food. Yeah, you did, Jake agreed while wrapping a wound. But that does not mean I let you die. I do not understand your kind. That makes us even. I do not understand yours either. Jake activated his emergency beacon. Extraction is coming. They will get you. Medical help. What about you, Jake? Looked toward the deep veil, toward where the shadow render waited in its territory. I still have a hunt to finish, but not that creature. It deserves to live in peace. Gormalik was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I was wrong about you, human. You hunt with more honor than I do. Jake smiled tiredly. We all hunt in our own way. Important thing is knowing when to hunt and when to walk away. The extraction shuttle arrived 20 minutes later as they loaded Gormalik onto the medical transport. The big warrior grabbed Jake's arm. When this is over, Gormalik said, I owe you a debt, a life debt. Jake nodded. Just pass it forward. Help someone else when they need it. The shuttle lifted off, carrying the wounded warrior to safety. Jake watched it go, then turned back to the jungle. The hunt was not over yet, but Jake Morrison had already accomplished something more important than any trophy. He had proven that being human meant more than size or strength. It meant intelligence, compassion, and the courage to face the impossible. High above in his observation room, the Supreme Hunter Karaga watched the footage of Jake's encounter with the shadow render for the third time. He had hunted for centuries. He had faced death 1,000 times, but he had never seen anything quite like what the small human just did. Remarkable, Karaga said softly. Truly remarkable. He made another note in his personal log. This human was no longer just worth watching, he was worth remembering. The hunt officially ended on the 10th day. Of the 50 hunters who entered Vidian 7, only 8 survived to the final extraction point. Some had withdrawn after injuries, some had died to the jungle's many dangers, and some, like Jake Morrison, had simply endured long enough to be counted among the survivors. Jake stood at the extraction point with the other 7 hunters. They were a rough group, covered in scars and mud and blood, but they were alive. They had faced one of the galaxy's deadliest hunting grounds and survived. That meant something. Zur was there, her broken arms in medical casts. She nodded to Jake when she saw him. No words, just recognition from one survivor to another. 3 Krathex warriors stood together, comparing their trophy collections. They had killed impressive prey and had the scars to prove it. They glanced at Jake but said nothing. The mockery from 10 days ago was gone, replaced by something else. Curiosity perhaps, or respect. Thornback hunter named Vrax approached Jake directly. I watched the orbital Footage, Vrax said in his rough voice. You faced the Shadow Render alone. You saved the Krathex warrior when you could. Have left him to die, this is true. 9 When it is true, Jake said. Vra studied him for a long moment, then he removed one of his smaller spikes, trophy from his own body, and handed it to Jake. You hunt with honor, human. I was wrong to judge you by your size. Jake accepted the spike, surprised. Thank you. The extraction ships arrived. Massive vessels that descended from orbit, but these were not the simple transports that brought the hunters to Vidian 7. These were ceremonial ships, decorated with the symbols of the hunting clans. This was not just a pick-up, this was a ceremony, and leading the extraction was a ship that made all the others look small, the personal vessel of the Supreme Hunter himself. Karadga descended from his ship like a king arriving at court. He was massive. Even by Krathex standards, his armor, decorated with trophies from hunts that span galaxies, every hunter present immediately showed signs of respect. This was not just a warrior, this was a legend. The Supreme Hunter walked past the other survivors, acknowledging each one with a nod. Then he stopped in front of Jake Morrison. The small human looked up at the towering warrior who had hunted on 1,000 worlds. Jake Morrison of Earth, Karga said, his voice carried across the clearing. I have watched your hunt, every moment of it. Jake swallowed nervously. I hope it was not too disappointing, Supreme Hunter. Karthaga made a sound that might have been a laugh. Disappointing? No, human, you have shown me something I have not seen in many years. You have reminded me what it truly means to hunt. He turned to address all the survivors and the orbital cameras that were broadcasting this moment across the galaxy. There are many who believe hunting is about strength, about size, about collecting trophies and displaying power, and these things have their place. But the greatest hunters understand something more. Karthaga placed a massive hand on Jake's shoulder. True hunting is about understanding. It is about knowing when to strike and when to show mercy. It is about respecting the prey and recognizing intelligence when you see it. It is about survival, yes, but also about honor. He looked directly at Jake. This human came to our hunt as an outsider, small, weak by our standards, with no natural weapons. Every being here mocked him. Even I doubted he would survive the first day, but Jake Morrison did more than survive. He studied the jungle like a scholar. He learned the behaviors of creatures that others only tried to kill. He tracked the Shadow Render, a beast that legends barely dare to mention, and he did not face it with arrogance or pride. He faced it with understanding. The Supreme Hunter reached into his armor and removed something that made everyone gasp. It was his personal hunting seal, a mark of honor that had not been given to another hunter in over 300 years. The seal was made from the tooth of the first great beast Karga ever hunted. It represented everything the hunting clans valued. Jake Morrison, Karthaga said formally, you saved a rival when you could have gained advantage from his death. You faced impossible danger to protect another. You showed that humanity understands what many warriors forget: strength without wisdom is just violence, power without honor is just destruction. He pressed the seal into Jake's hand. I call you brother Jake Morrison of Earth, not because you are the strongest hunter, not because you killed the most, Prey, but because you understand what it means to truly hunt. You hunt with the wisdom of ancients and the heart of a warrior. The clearing erupted. Krathek's warriors roared their approval. A sound like thunder, Zur raised her good arms in salute, Vrax and the other survivors joined in the celebration. This was history being made, a human. The species everyone dismissed as weak had earned the respect of the Supreme Hunter himself. Jake stood there holding the seal, tears running down his face. He thought about his grandfather, about the old man who told him that size did not matter, that thinking differently could change everything. If his grandfather could see this moment, he would be proud. Gormalik arrived at the ceremony in a medical transport. His injuries were still healing, but he insisted on being present. He walked up to Jake, limping slightly, and for a moment the two warriors just looked at each other. Then Gormalik did something that shocked everyone. He removed his clan dagger, a weapon passed down through his family for generations, and offered it to Jake. I judged you by appearance, Gormalik said. I called you weak and mocked your strength, but you saved my life when you should have let me die. You showed mercy when I showed only pride. He pressed the dagger into Jake's other hand. This is my apology and my oath. You are my brother now. My clan will remember what you did forever. Jake accepted the dagger with shaking hands. I did what anyone should do. I helped someone who needed help. No, Gormalik said firmly. Many would not have helped. Many would have used my death to advance their own position. You chose differently. That is why you are worthy of honor. The ceremony continued long into the night. Hunters who mocked Jake 10 days ago now approached him with respect. They wanted to hear about his encounter with the Shadow Render. They wanted to know how he tracked without being seen. They wanted to understand how a human with no natural weapons could survive. What killed so many others? Jake answered their questions honestly. He explained his methods. He shared what he learned about animal behavior and territorial boundaries. He talked about patience and observation and understanding, and the hunters listened. Really listened, because the Supreme Hunter had declared him worthy. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light. Earth, the newcomer world, had produced a hunter that impressed the legendary Karaga, the species that everyone dismissed as too weak, too small, too soft, had proven they understood hunting in ways that went beyond physical strength. Human stock rose in the Galactic Council. Doors that were closed to Earth diplomats suddenly open. Species that ignored human trade requests suddenly wanted to negotiate. All because one small man survived jungle and showed mercy to a rival. Jake returned to Earth 3 weeks later. He arrived not as the lieutenant who left, but as something else, a bridge between humanity and the greater galaxy, the first human to be called brother by the Supreme Hunter, the man who proved that humans belonged among the stars. His grandfather's compass was placed in the Galactic Museum of Hunting, displayed next to the Supreme Hunter's seal and Gormalik's dagger, 3 simple objects that told a story about courage, intelligence, and the power of doing what was right, even when it was hard. Jake eventually became Earth's ambassador to the hunting clans. He opened pathways for other humans to join the hunts to prove themselves in the galaxy's great trials, but he always taught them the same lesson he learned on Vidian 7. Being human was not about being the strongest or the fastest or the most dangerous. Being human was about being smart enough to learn, brave enough to face fear, and compassionate enough to help others even when it cost you something. Those were the traits that made humanity special. Those were the traits that would carry them to the stars. Years later, Jake stood on a platform overlooking Earth and remembered the day he faced the shadow Render, the day he chose to save Gormalik instead of letting him die. The day everything changed. A young cadet approached him. She was preparing for her own trial, her own hunt. She was nervous, worried that she was too small, too inexperienced, too human to succeed. Jake smiled and showed her the 3 objects he still carried: a compass that did not work in space, a seal from an ancient warrior, dagger from a former enemy who became a brother. Remember this, Jake told her. The galaxy will judge you by their standards at first. They will see your size, your lack of claws, your soft skin. They will mock you and doubt you. Let them, because when you prove them wrong, when you show them what humans can really do, their respect will mean something, and you will have changed their minds forever. The cadet nodded, her fear replaced by determination. Jake watched her go and thought about all the humans who would follow, all the hunters who would carry Earth's name to distant worlds, all the warriors who would prove that humanity belonged among the stars, not through conquest or domination, but through intelligence, courage, and honor. The small Earthborn who was mocked had become the brother of the supreme hunter, and in doing so he opened the way for all of humanity to rise. That was the true hunt, not for trophies or glory, but for a place among the stars where humans could stand tall, not despite their differences, but because of them. The galaxy had learned an important lesson from Jake Morrison. Never underestimate the humans. They may be small, they may seem weak, but they think differently, they adapt endlessly, and they never ever give up, and sometimes that makes all the